David Blyth, thank you so much for being here, chatting to me today. Last time I spoke to you, we were screening Angel Mine at the Capitol Cinema. That was a really excellent night.
It
Uh,
was.
it was a really good time. Now, Rialto is premiering Night Freaks in November, which is your latest film. Um, we're going to talk about your career in general, but maybe let's start with Night Freaks, since that's the one that we're going to be seeing the soonest. Um, so, where did the idea for that film come from originally?
Oh well, it sort of all came out of the pandemic
Mm,
and the lockdown, and I don't know the uncertainty in that very first period of March 2020, April, May, when we were all locked down, and
mm,
we didn't know whether the virus was going to sweep through, and it was also very I became very much aware during the pandemic of how, the surveillance capitalism and big pharma and all sorts of things were going on. And I suddenly realized that, a whole lot of stuff was coming up for me from my own past. Because I'd always thought, the filmmaking was about revealed, concealed, but now I'm starting to think it's about remembering, forgetting.
mm.
Because our minds, our consciousness goes through various processes, and some of us, get that opportunity to, pursue things in our own, journeys. And so Night Freaks became a journey into the story tropes that I felt were now no longer relevant post pandemic.
Right.
And I've always been interested in the horror of the everyday.
Mm,
And you can sort of take that to the next level of what happens when an ordinary person has a mind-blowing event, whether that's seeing a UFO or a ghost or some kind of premonition or deja vu, or basically I became really interested in, what happens when the fabric of your reality suddenly gets ripped open, even if it's only briefly. It
mm.
actually shows you that everything's just way bigger and way connected.
Yeah.
We're also connected. I mentioned earlier that Angel Mine and Night Freaks are actually like bookends.
Mm,
And what is going to be fascinating about Angel Mine being screened is that it's really, it was 1978, and I was pushing that the television commercials were a blueprint for this consumer surveillance society. And here we are, and Angel Line screening on Rialto in 2025 is just sort of incredible.
it is interesting that, there are those echoes throughout of your career in Night Freaks.
Yes.
It's really interesting that you can see that through line back to your first film, which you made at 21, I believe. Um, it's also, it ties into something that I've seen in your work, which is this kind of interest in genre, playing with genre, some of these more kind of, I guess, outlandish elements of genre. In this, there's obviously science fiction, there's the element that's the musical element, there's animation. Um, can you tell me about where those elements started to kind of come in this film? The decision to include animated sequences, the decision to include original music.
Well, I started writing some songs, some lyrics
Mm,
after the pandemic started, and I'd had a birthday where I'd invited Andrew McClellan and Jed Town, who's been the composer of a lot of my film
mm,
tracks for a good 20 plus years. And we had a bit of a concert here. And then I suddenly realized in the beginning of the pandemic that I actually had all the elements at my birthday party. I'm fascinated with sort of looking at the genre story tropes, but in a way trying to find a fresh way through and not just holding on to something, a story trope, because it's a habitual thing.
Rialto is going to be showing not just Night Freaks, but five other of your films in a January retrospective. So we've got Angel Mine, Wound, we've got a personal favorite of mine, Death Warmed Up, Moonrise, and Ghost Bride. Um, how does it feel to see all of those films kind of put together in this package, and being revisited in this way?
Well, it's kind of wonderful. So three of the films, Angel Mine, Death Warmed Up, and Moonrise, were all funded by the Film Commission.
Mm.
But Wound, Ghost Bride, and Night Freaks are a trilogy. And all the films revolve around the family dynamic and just how that has such a profound effect on all of us. And really, in a way, our childhood is, it just so sets the stage.
It's a real introduction to the David Blyth, you know,
Mm.
body of work. If you had to say that there was a film to for people to watch to kind of get started, to introduce yourself to the audience, I guess, is there one that you would highlight, one that you think, oh, watch that one first and then start digging deeper?
Well, I think obviously Death Warmed Up and Moonrise are more traditional in their narrative. But
Mm,
if you really want to see something different, I think Angel Mine is one of the most unique New Zealand films.
I would agree.
It
It's a pretty
breaks
special
all the
film.
walls, and it's the only New Zealand film that's actually looking at our kind of cultural tropes, if you like. Angel Mine, and which came out of my university, Auckland University days, and reading people like Roland Barthes and
Mm.
who were looking at media and just how manipulative it is.
You touched on something quite interesting there, which I think I've noticed in your work is this kind of, I mean, it is taking it seriously, but there's this kind of gleeful send up of New Zealand culture where you sort of poke the bear a little bit, especially with to do with that. Like an element that I noticed also in Death Warmed Up is this kind of the way that New Zealanders have this buttoned down, repressed feeling, and how you bring this kind of challenging, erotic element to it as well. So what can you tell us a little bit about that kind of impulse in your work?
Well, yes, I think New Zealand is so conservative sexually in many many ways, and you know from looking at New Zealand films, you'd have to say The Stork brings the baby. This,
Yeah.
and it's also interesting that, with Death Warmed Up, we were judged against American films, like
Yeah.
Friday the 13th.
Mm,
But because it was set within New Zealand, and we and Death Warmed Up had a very obvious home invasion,
mm,
which has become, a whole thing in New Zealand. But it
mm.
was an attack not only on the suburban temple, if you like, but on the very fabric of the father and mother and shooting
Yeah,
the mother. And
absolutely.
so it's attacking the family unit from within. It's
Absolutely.
the side of the New Zealand suburbia you will never see in another New Zealand film, but it's actually the reality.
I mean, you've been making this kind of outsider independent cinema for decades now, and I wanted to ask, how has your perception of the filmmaking craft changed over time in terms of your own work, in terms of like how you approach making a film?
Well, you have to remember that I started out when it was 16 millimeter film.
Mm,
And so I had to buy myself, a Bolex camera.
mm,
And then I actually negotiated with the government, and I bought 70,000 feet of FP4 Ilford black and white film stock for,
Mm,
like $40. Because this was when television went from black and white to color.
mm,
So I had to buy the stock, and then I had to find someone that had a a little processing machine.
mm,
And then you have to make a print. So there was all these processes and costs that for the individual, off the, just the everyday person who wasn't necessarily in the industry,
mm,
huge costs. Whereas, fast forward to today, and you can use your phone
mm,
and a very simple piece of editing. So, really, the journey has been from having to have all these other people involved, from processors, editors, cameramen, crews, to the realization in the pandemic that I could do it with one other person.
mm. Absolutely.
And so that it it's gone from it being an elite industry, a bit like, the America's Cup, if you like,
Mhm.
to an everyman TikTok reality where anyone can put together 20 seconds
Mm,
and get an audience. And it's a two-edged sword, though,
mm.
because we've gone from quite limited numbers of films to literally a film lake
Yeah.
of material. So now audiences are just absolutely overwhelmed with
Mm.
what they can watch.
So happy that we're able to dive into that journey and come along with you. David, thank you so much for chatting to us